Fremzenek Podcast episode 9, and Simon's back from episode 7.
Yeah, GDP, where do we go with that? Because politicians of whatever flavour are always talking about GDP. I reckon the simplest way to look at GDP from a blue-collar perspective like me is the difference between turnover and if it's measured against, let's say, PPP, purchase power parity, is profit margin. And anybody can have a large turnover. But the difference to get a decent profit margin is like 9. Just an opinion. But have a large business, be turning over a lot of money and actually be losing money. So I don't see that GDP is necessarily a measure of wealth. And even if we do measure GDP, by what metric? By a metric on Western standards. So I don't know, GDP, how accurate is it?
GDP is also, so just to explain, right, there's different types of GDP got down here. So there's expenditure approach, which is sort of a classical approach where it's consumer spending plus business investment plus government spending. I mean, even that, right, that's, as with government spending, for example, it can shoot up during COVID, crashed and then immediately shot back up because the government furloughed everyone. And so that's a direct example how GDP in nowhere reflects economic growth, right? Loads of people were out of their job, but the GDP can grow or at least recover very fast because the government just stepped in and spending. So it's sort of, you can establish how it's very artificial and made up. And then on top of that, the exports minus imports, that's not necessarily measured in real terms. That includes services as well. So rather than just the merchandise account, that's its balance of trade as a whole. So the UK on paper is importing a lot of goods, but is also exporting a lot of services. And so GDP is also not representative of output.
But we've got a trade deficit, so something's not working. We're operating effectively at a loss.
Well, so you say that there's an MMT perspective where it's like, if you have a trade deficit, that's actually a benefit. Because what are you like? All you're doing is exporting pounds essentially, and in return you're getting essentially free goods.
But the pound's devaluing.
Yeah, I mean,
it's not devaluing a bit. It's crashing. It's crashed against the US dollar. It's crashed against the euro. We can Google it. It's crashed against the Helvetican franc.
In the long run, yeah.
It's toast. It's a junk currency. It is a junk currency. Gilts are being dumped. So, in fact, there's such a risk that they cannot shift them at the auctions. That's how bad it is.
Right.
So, what do you do with the junk currency, and what happens?
Well, I mean, you can obviously revalue it with higher interest.
Well, let's just stop at that. We're going to revalue it. First of all, who revalues it?
It's because it's a free floating currency. It isn't central bank anymore. It's investors, everyone.
No, the international credit ratings agencies value. And what have they done?
I mean,
they've devalued it. They've said your credit rating is no good. Fitch's,
they did the same
Moody's,
to the US.
Standard & Poor's, Dargong, DBRS Morningstar, and that is just the main one. And then, of course, there's all the others that look at businesses individually, your limited companies, your public limited companies, everything, even individuals, even us, we have a credit rating. Yeah. If you're in business, you have a credit rating. If you have a larger company, you have a credit rating. Country, you have a credit rating. And it's all being downgraded because services, talk about exporting services, nothing tangible. Yeah. And I can set up here's a good one. Goldman Sachs recently informed their gold traders in New York they've got 48 hours to relocate. Their families all paid for. Their kids all in international schools. Private healthcare, accommodation, moving costs, all covered. You've got 48 hours to move, otherwise you haven't got a job. And it's that simple. You just move where the money goes. So when we're talking about economic, I'm really trying to figure out how, when we're dealing with all your classical economists who we've been through, Keynes and so on, and that they've all got, let's not say similar views because that's unfair. Let's say they're either perhaps very, very pro free market economy. Name one. I mean, you'll know who's a
Hayek.
Okay, great, thank you, great. Very great proponent of the free market economy. You've got maybe some more who are more sort of, let's not say philanthropic or altruistic, but some more who will perhaps focus on the social needs of a country, you know, and individual welfare like health, education. That the state should be there as a safety net.
Collect key.
Right, exactly. And yet none of them have worked because we've tried it all, and not one single one has been successful. And let's look at politics. Let's take socialism. Not worked. Don't think I'm having a go at socialism, because I'm certainly not. Communism. It worked for a bit and it collapsed.
Well, that's assuming we ever tried communism before.
Well, there are plenty.
Through communism, there's no money.
Well,
and every communist society has had money. There's the peak irony of the Soviet Union was faces of Lenin on the ruble. You know, the guy who tried to remove money in the 1920s. It
had an internalized economy, but you could say the same of that of Germany with during the Wirtschaftswunder in the 70s, and it didn't do them any harm. Yeah. So let's skip from that. And capitalism, that's no better. That's failed as well. So we've got three systems, all of which none of them work.
I'm a Georgist.
Well,
I would say that Georgism sort of argues capitalism can work, but we need to have, you know, control, natural monopoly. We need to make land.
That's a really good point. I'm so pleased you've said that. That just brings me on to my next point. We're going to control sort of monopolies. Okay, but let's pick. Let's pick oil. That's a fair one, isn't it? Let's pick oil. How are you going to control it?
So Norway is a great example of this. I discussed this in another episode. Norway has implemented a tax on the extraction of oil, not on oil, on the extraction of oil. So for every barrel of oil extracted, a certain amount of tax is paid on that, and the government has used that to fund a sovereign wealth fund,
Brilliant
which
idea.
has been invested
Fantastic
all over the
idea.
country, internationally, all of these things.
Yeah.
So it's genuinely benefited the government, which then, as a result, benefits the people who benefit from the government.
It has indeed, and I'm all for that. I think it's a great idea.
And that's Georgia's policy.
I think that's a fantastic idea. And why has it worked? They've got a small population. What happens when you've got a larger population?
You need devolvement, certainly, to have Georgism as a whole. I mean, there's different types of Georgism, but a lot of Georgists will argue for devolvement because that eases bureaucracy.
So they've got a small population. It is taxed. That money, instead of it has gone for the benefit of the citizens via tax. Sooner or later, and we can look at Marion Hubbert's peak oil graphs, commissioned, I think, 50-6, something like that, by Shell, that we've hit peak oil. With the environmental pressure that's coming on at the moment, how long will that last?
It's 30, 40 years, but they keep finding new reserves.
They do keep finding new reserves.
Bringing back, because we're obviously talking about measures of the economy. So bringing back to the economy, then you have to think about, so with GDP, for example, is obviously extracting oil boosts GDP, taking a tax on that oil to increase the sovereign wealth fund, on paper boosts GDP, but the GDP of Norway is nowhere near the size of its wealth fund.
So we agree that it's not really an accurate measure of wealth.
Exactly. So this is what I'm trying to get at, is that GDP may measure sort of the flow of money in an economy, but nowhere near represents the size of an economy. Because Norway, on the world rankings, is not in top 50.
No, and yet their citizens have got a high standard of living.
They have a high standard of living.
Healthcare's great.
Their wealth is through the roof on the sovereign wealth fund and all these other things. If we measured GDP by, say, even just purely monetary and just looked at how many dollars are in each country, Norway would be well up there because they own a lot of US stocks and other things which are dominated dollars. But I mean, so the point is, GDP is hugely inaccurate in every single way. We could briefly discuss GNI, but I feel like we already discussed that with Norway, for example. They have a very low, not a low GDP, but compared to their GNI is way higher because they invested around the world.
Well, that's been invested by a government who obviously are financially savvy. So what's happened to our money?
Well, so obviously the UK doesn't have a sovereign wealth fund, but it has the National Wealth Bank, I believe, and they do investment. But a lot of their investment is domestic.
Right, because I've not seen any of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Where is it? Because we've got one of the lowest standard of livings in Europe.
Yeah, and one of the highest costs of living.
Right.
And I think a lot of that goes down to privatisation. Public services being gutted and all for profit, and a lot of the public services aren't even owned by Brits. The Royal Mail's a great example. That's owned by a Czech billionaire type.
It is indeed.
Yeah. So
Anglian Water, owned by, what is it, a Canadian pension fund, who are in turn owned by a Chinese investment bank.
Yeah, exactly. So
So we don't have anything in this country apart from Scottish Water that's owned. Scottish Power, owned by Iberdrola, Spanish.
we've been gutted in terms of not only like the government selling us off, but also the international community sort of
So it
taking
leads us back to
advantage
that
of this.
question: where's the money gone?
As I said, of the international,
It doesn't
people,
balance.
it's
So
that.
where's the benefits then?
There's very
Lowest pension in Europe, one of the lowest standards of living, healthcare, complete and utter joke, infrastructure falling apart. So you've got to say it's bad governance. It's like any company, it's bad governance.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's bad governance where it's just the government makes a mistake, and then there's sort of this intentional, like not messing up of a.
But
like,
we've had plenty in of all flavours. We've had Labour in, we've had Conservative in, we've had them type people in.
None of them have national. It's only now that Labour's nationalising rail, and even that's.
And how's that going?
Not particularly well because it's.
We've got no steel industry. Where are you going to make this stuff?
But the costs have scaled massively and massively because we privatised it. I mean, a land value tax, in my mind, just simply allows the government to implement policies more effectively because land is the ultimate limiting factor, especially in the UK.
You can't tax your way to prosperity, though, can you? And who do you tax?
That's why land value tax is so counterintuitive. You can tax prosperity with value tax.
That has never worked in the history of economics.
Land value tax has. It worked in Singapore. It's worked in Namibia, the most recent example. I mean, that's also a good example. Singapore and Namibia.
Who do they tax?
They tax the land. They tax the owners of the land.
The owners of the land. But you cannot. That cost is then passed on. That's passed on to the smaller people down the chain.
It isn't. You can't pass on a land value tax because, okay, so for example, let's take rent, right? If you're a tenant farmer and you say, oh, I'm renting this acre of land for £600 a week.
Yeah.
And then the landlord's like, oh, I'm raising that rent. Why are you raising that rent? Because the land they're using must have gone up in value, so then they pay more land value tax. So it's either you raise the rent and then you incur like more taxes on that as the landlord, or you keep your rent low and pay less tax but also get less rent value. Or the ultimate way to avoid it is, of course, just sell the land because the landlord isn't getting any output from that land, but the farmer is.
Tax it out of existence.
Not tax the land out of existence, just tax the owners out of existence.
But that's what you tax the ownership of land out.
No, you haven't, because but then so the farmer that now has that land because it's been sold by the landlord.
Yeah.
That he's still getting a profit from that land by growing, say, wheat, selling that wheat.
Getting smaller and smaller and smaller. The actual landowner sees ever diminishing return on that capital.
How so? He owns the land and he's getting an output and he's getting a profit margin.
And you tax it.
You tax the land.
Yeah.
But the profit you're getting from that land will be greater than the value of that land.
I'm absolutely a blank there. I have an asset, say I've worked for. You're going to tax me for renting that out.
Okay, so if you're taxing it at, say...
All I'm going to do is sell it and move.
That's the point. That's the whole point. You want landlords out of the economy because they're increasing the factors of production and cost. In fact, I mean, again, linking back to GDP, rent counts as part of GDP, but I argue it shouldn't because rent is an economic inefficiency.
So if you tax landlords out of the economy, then where is the motivation?
The state would theoretically be the landlord, but the state doesn't necessarily have a profit motive, and therefore the state would sell it on to those who actually need it and then would use it. Or even if you're a landlord, you could buy land.
Can I just stop at that point? Let me get this straight. You're saying that by taxing private ownership of land or, what's your
purely just land,
resources or whatever. Okay.
You wouldn't tax the resources, you tax the extraction for and the land because you can't make any more land. You can't make any more. I mean, you can synthesize oil, but extraction. There's a certain amount of oil reserves in the world that we can't get any more of. So therefore, you should tax that in order to have some money to spend.
You can't tax oil. You can't tax.
No, exactly. But you tax the extraction of oil, as we just, and then you tax land as well because.
But they don't pay tax. Nobody pays. That doesn't work.
How did Norway raise the funds for this?
Well, because that is owned by Norway, and
but not all oil extraction was done by the state. It was
that's
private, and the private companies paid that tax. So you can tax it.
Well, they tax extraction licenses, but that cost is passed on, isn't it? They don't pay tax.
The consumer wouldn't pay the tax on the oil, though, because oil's traded internationally.
Right. When you sit and look at this computer screen or that microphone or the shoes I'm wearing, that's all made out of oil.
Yes.
That Coke bottle is made out of oil.
Yes.
Everything you got runs on oil.
Yes.
Without it, we're toast.
Absolutely.
And every goddamn thing that you buy is taxed.
Yeah.
Everything.
Sales tax.
Where's that go?
The government. Right. You tax it. I mean, of course. So, okay. So maybe this is a poor example, right? So a value-added tax is a very bad example because you can push it onto the consumer. You can't push a land value tax onto the consumer because, as I said, as the producer, quote unquote, more owner of that land, you can't push the cost of a land value tax onto the rentee.
Let's go back to Singapore as an example of land value tax.
That's accepting that the land
it's
is more
an
valuable.
Extremely expensive place. In fact, one of the most expensive places because that cost is passed on to the residents of that area. They're not going to own something and just sit and say
90% of houses in Singapore are state-owned.
Right.
If you're a resident of Singapore, you very rarely own your own home, but you have your home, which is leased off the state. And oftentimes you'll have a mortgage from the state and pay that off, but it's never yours, it's leased.
Isn't that communism?
I mean, if you think Singapore's communist, feel free to say
I
that.
don't,
I disagree.
I don't say it. I'm saying that
George's.
if the state owns that so much property, where is the incentive for the individual to do better?
To increase their own material wealth. So, for example, as I said, they lease the house for their lifetime, and then once they die, the children then have a choice to buy that off of the state again.
What happens if you don't have kids?
Well, then the state takes it and can then redistribute that house to another.
What happens if I want it to go elsewhere?
Well, you don't. That's just how it is. So
the state is taking away my freedom of choice, a fundamental human right. Okay.
No, you have a choice of what apartment you take. It's just when you buy it, you're leasing.
Oh, they're graciously allowing me to rent something from them to put a roof over my head.
Yeah, but it's very affordable. You have you have choice, and it's all affordable.
Right.
It's okay. So it's either you have this. Sure, you can say, "Oh, we need a free market to distribute housing." But
right.
Singapore does it where it's like, "Oh, you have a free choice to rent housing, or not rent, but buy housing from the state and the state that later on."
Because it's so expensive, because it's so densely populated.
Yeah, but it's very cheap. It's very affordable for the common person to buy a house.
So let's
yeah, you can say with you're taking away the fundamental right, but equally so, having a free market fundamentally means there's homeless people. Yeah. Whereas if a Singaporean model, there's no homeless people, and I would say having no homeless people is much better for the standard of living than say taking away a human right, which is even then questionable because you still have a choice to buy a house. Or buy a better house or buy a better flat or whatever.
Just not there.
You just need to increase your income to then afford it.
But not everybody can do that, can they?
Well, no, but that's a free. Again, going back to the free market, not everyone can have a high income.
No, it can't.
So
but
there's always going to be unfairness.
If you've got a high density population, then never mind the economics of it. If you've got a very high density population, it's supply and demand. I mean, that is number one rule in economics, isn't it? Supply and demand. So if you've got a massively high demand on a finite land source, like Singapore, let's take that as a great example. Property is like any major city, New York, Amsterdam, Rotterdam, London, doesn't matter which, Paris. Dense population, a lot of concentrated wealth, very, very difficult to rent or buy there. But those people in that area are given no choice.
Yeah. In Singapore, that's a different example, as I said, with the thing.
Okay, so we can dispense with that example because it's not accurate, is it? It's not an accurate...
Because in your mind, it's communist.
It is communist. Once I've got the state dictating my civil liberties, that's communist. Once I've got the state dictating how much I potentially own, where I potentially live,
purely based on
well, that's their choice again.
You can own as much gold, as much silver, as much any other value of wealth as you want.
Yeah,
but you can't just own land at the expense of another person.
Okay.
Because you can make more. Gold's a bad example because there's a finite amount of gold, but you can get a high enough income and buy different producible goods, but you can't buy more land.
But you've still got to live, haven't you? And for the average person, let's take a sort of median. You're always going to get a sort of small percentage of people at the top, small percentage at the bottom, and let's just take a median how do people get out of that situation where the state is saying to them, this is where you're going to live, this is primarily what you're going to earn?
Again, they don't say that you can get higher income and then choose what flat you want.
How are you going to get higher income?
By working.
Okay, there's only so many hours in the day.
Of course, yeah, and so okay, you could say that's a good argument for income tax. There's only so many hours you work in a day. The finite supply of labour, right? But then also that's a different state intervention. State's taking away your earnings.
So the net result of that is exactly the same as capitalism, that sooner or later you max out on your earnings potential and you are kept at a certain social strata.
That's wrong, because you're not taxing productivity, you tax for land rather than tax for capital and labour. As we do.
So let's say I work hard, really hard, and I buy some land. I don't see how it's...
You just pay a tax on that land.
Why should I pay for that? If I've already been taxed on my earnings, if I've already put labour on it, why should I be taxed again?
Because land is essentially a huge bubble. Every single generation has to pay more and more and more for land because every single generation before them has bought the land.
In which country?
In every country in the world. In the modern day, every country, other than like Singapore and these rare examples where there's value tax, land prices continue to go up because the generation before them spent X amount and they want a profit, so they demand another profit. They demand, when they sell it, a higher price and a higher price and a higher price. And essentially, it's just a big bubble. Of course, this is like a phenomenon across the globe with inflation, but inflation of goods tends to be a lot slower than inflation of land values.
But there's a correlation between population pressure.
You look at population density in London, it's outpacing population growth, and yet land prices continue to go up.
Isn't that supply and demand again, that people need somewhere to live?
Yeah, but as I say, the supply of living space has gone up, but the demand of from the population has also gone up, but at a slower rate, and yet land prices as a whole have gone up.
Well, it will do if there's more demand for it.
But there's a more densely populated population. There's more people.
I don't want to live like that.
No, not okay. That's your personal preference, but
that's most people's preference.
What I'm describing, though, is that people are living in flats and high rises rather than suburban.
And most people hate them. They hate living like that.
Singapore has one of the highest living standards on everyone lives in high rise. That's the point. Of course, it just doesn't make sense. If people are living on less land and at a higher rate than the population's increase and land prices go up, it doesn't make sense. And why is that? Again, as I said, the people who own the land want a profit margin on their purchase. They don't care about actually what's going to happen to the land. They just care about the number in their bank account. And what we should be caring is what we are doing with the land. That's why we need a land value tax to by selling it rather than holding it.
I'd have to look into this bit about Singapore, about mental health. If you don't know any different, and presumably a lot of people in Singapore are working in the financial sectors, because it's a massive concentration of financial. What we're not talking about, maybe, is blue-collar work. Because how do they fare then?
Well, there's a lot of blue-collar workers in, like what people claim, because, of course, Singapore's constantly expanding and there's loads of construction going on.
There are?
Yeah. So, and it's those same people who still benefit because they have the affordable homes and they have, obviously, the state-subsidised housing and everything. The state will, but
the state subsidises it through taxation.
The state does not subsidise it through taxation. The state has a scalable rent system where rent is always about...
But the state must tax individuals.
Yes, but not...
But there's no tax in Singapore.
There's income tax,
Let's have a look.
There's income tax in Singapore.
So they do taxes in individuals, thank you.
Yes, but comparatively to, say, the US or the UK, it's a lot less. Because, as I said, they have scalable rents. So rent is always about 10 to 20% of your income. So if you're very
low... So they're taxing them twice then?
Not really.
But rent's tax. Surely that's destroyed the argument of land ownership.
Rent's a form of tax.
Absolutely.
But then you have to look at... But then, okay, so you yourself arguing for the free market. Why do you think...
Absolutely.
Why should we allow landlords? Because they're incurring a rent, which is a tax. And therefore, where is that landlord spending that tax? Usually not.
Doesn't that make the Singaporean government a landlord?
Yes, and that's the argument. The state should be the landlord.
Well,
and then the state can reinvest that to the good of the common
person.
The
Singaporean state or government is effectively acting as a landlord.
Essentially, yeah.
Right. So, not so good then.
No, because
rather destroys that economic argument.
No, the economic argument is that if the state's the landlord, the state will reinvest said funds into more productive. State isn't going to, unlike, say, a landlord, right? The state never really wants to run a surplus. They either want to break even or maybe run a little bit of a deficit to spend more. So Yeah. So, but if you're a landlord, you extract that rent, and what do? You hold on to it, or you buy luxury goods and sort of waste it. The state, of course, alternatively, takes that income and is like, oh, we should invest it in X, Y, Z, rather than hold on.
So that decision's been made for me.
Essentially,
through double taxation, any freedom of choice that I have in that area is taken from me by A, income tax, and B, form of state taxation on the very roof over my head.
it's not a state tax. Oh, okay, yeah, rent's a tax.
Absolutely, it's a
but
tax.
it goes to.
If I've got no choice
it goes
over
back
it.
to benefit you. Singapore has some of the best healthcare, of course. And both agree Singapore has very high income. That's primarily been led through government development.
The healthcare in Singapore is outstanding.
Yes.
So
the benefit you get from a small tax on your living space, especially when that, of course, that living space is going to the benefit in keeping and suppressing.
But there's not much personal expenditure. There's not much money left over for the average earner in Singapore to better themselves. But they can live well, and the state will provide healthcare, excellent, education, excellent. If you're unemployed, and I have researched this, if you're unemployed, the state steps in and will do everything it can to provide training, support, education to get you back into the workforce. Isn't that slavery?
I wouldn't say so. How is wanting people to work slavery?
Because I'm not given a choice.
You are given.
I'm all for education, by the way. I'm all for training. I'm still being educated. In
Singapore,
and
you're free to go and live in the streets if you so wanted, but very few do. But that is a subsection.
No, because you're not given a choice, are you?
That is a subsection of population. There's 600 to 1,000 homeless people in Singapore who simply just reject having a job.
You will toe the line, or you're without the benefits of society. Yeah.
If you're just a free functioning working person, you do have a choice to not work, but the consequence of that is that you don't get a house.
Exactly. The consequence, it's like the difference with civil and criminal law, isn't it? You're either going to get a sanction or a remedy. And in this instance, we're sort of being the individual subject to both a sanction and a remedy. That you're offered that route out, i.e. retrain, re-educate, whatever, toe the line, or you will get sanctioned because you will not be part of their society. And being part of their society, as we've already clearly established, that you are going to be subject to at least 2 different forms of taxation. As a median income earner, you are never going to be in a position where you can sort of say, well, I like the look of that property over there, I'll go and buy it, because the density of population.
In the UK, though.
Absolutely it is.
And yet in the UK, we don't get benefits from social rents.
No.
We don't get the low taxation from social rents.
I'll start.
Affordable property.
Given the question, would I rather live in Singapore or the UK?
Yes.
I'm ready to pack my bags now and go to Singapore.
You're sort of poking holes in this perfect system, which doesn't need holes poking because it works.
I would go to Singapore now. I would have no. Don't get. I'm not criticising their system as compared to the UK. What we're talking about here is, let's not get into this issue of politics and the economy being 2 separate entities, because they're certainly not. And let's get away from this issue of taxation ever really being beneficial, because let's go back to Norway, because I quite like that one about the Norwegian government. They've taxed all this, that, and that. Yeah, they get taxed on that. That cost is passed down the line. They passed out sooner or later. Here's a silly example, right? Let's say you want more tax from the oil extraction companies who don't pay tax. Of course they don't. And you can sort of say, look, for the extraction licenses and everything else, we're going to tax you more because our sovereign wealth needs to go up. Right? They're going, yeah, okay, we've got no choice, we'll pay it. As it happens, they have got a choice. They'll just pull it and say, drill it yourself, get it yourself. You can't do that because we haven't got the technology and all the rest. So that's added, even if it's a fraction of a penny to the ink on that tin of beer over there, which uses oil. It's passed on down the line to the consumer.
Okay, as I've explained, with non-reproducible goods, that isn't. Like I say, oil's a really good example because yes, in Norway taxed this oil, right, of the extraction of this oil, and then the oil companies have to sell it for a profit, but they're competing on a global market where the oil industry is surprisingly perfectly competitive. Because if, say, OPEC tried to, this is a great example, OPEC tried to cut production to reduce prices, America now increases it's shale production, and that again eats into the supernormal profits that they were getting beforehand. So, but as I was getting with Norway, as I've just explained, the price doesn't really fluctuate with oil. I mean, it does obviously. We see oil fluctuating prices, but if you, as a firm, try to push off the cost onto the consumer will go and buy from a different oil company. And as you say with the Coca-Cola bottle, the producer is, of course, let's say Coca-Cola, who makes the plastic bottles. They don't. They have a contractor. But let's say they do. That producer will just go buy oil, not from a Norwegian oil company, but like from an Iranian oil company who don't have any extraction tax.
That doesn't work like that. I tell you what, how the way it works is this. Good way of looking into this, by the way, if you want to know how that works, it's free. Go on it, Marine Tracker. This is the way this works. Let's say we've got a tanker, okay, and that tanker's got nothing in it. The first thing that's going to happen is in that hold, which will take so many million cubic meters of crude oil, is the space is sold, first of all. That's sold on the global markets. So when we're talking about the consumer's got a choice, the consumer's got no choice. That's illusory. Because if you've got a Shell or Texaco or Aramco or Gulf, those prices within fractions of a penny are going to be absolutely the same. And when we're talking about oil, we're actually talking about the petrochemical industry, which is something entirely different. I do happen to have the figures here, and also the PPP figures globally as well. Anyway, let's get into that. Let's just look at this recent business, just darting off a little tributary. With Russia, that Russia apparently, it's sanctioned and all the rest of it, and their oil revenues down, going on from what you said, that the consumer's got a choice, that the EU's imposing sanctions, the United Nations using their influence, same as America's imposing sanctions on Venezuela, blah, 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 blah. Okay, well, let's look at this. What happened with Poland? Poland, it's in the EU. It's supposed to be sanctioning Russia. How come it imported $1.8 billion worth then?
From Russia?
From Russia. Well, now here's an interesting one.
Is that a discounted rate?
Well, it's not discounted. That's the thing. It's absolutely not discounted. And I've got the figures and the stats to back that up as well. Now, this is a really interesting one. It started on... I started looking at this. You see, German industry. That's a good one. That relies on... basically 45 billion euro of crude oil each year just to keep functioning. That's a bare minimum. Yeah. Where's it coming from? Norway. Well, we know about Norway. We've already covered that. Libya, we know about that. The USA, not very much following the USA, surprisingly enough, not very much. Here's the important one, Kazakhstan. And you think, well, so what? Kazakhstan's not that big, so what? No, it's not. However, it's part of this. It's a CIS country, which is a Commonwealth independent state country. Yeah. And here's what: who's a member of that? Well, we'll run through that quickly. Armenia, we've got Azerbaijan, Belarus, let's say Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Moldova, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan, and most importantly, Russia, who share all the same port facilities. Now, let's say you go back to our empty tanker hold. Now, bear in mind, this is going the Ural Sea, the Black Sea, and all the rest of it. Now, all the CIS countries are pumping their oil in, and they're selling it to Poland, Germany, and the rest of the EU, and that goes in there. Whose oil?
Well, of course, I say it originates.
Exactly. And interestingly enough, when we're talking about that, here's something else I dug out. This is quite interesting. Gas. How much last year LNG went to Europe to keep German industry afloat? And where did it come from? I didn't even know this existed, by the way. This is fascinating. It exported 1.1 billion euros worth of gas via the Druzhba pipeline. So sanctioned? No, it's not sanctioned, because the moment it's sanctioned, Germany shuts down, France shuts down, the Netherlands shuts down.
Consumption is decreased substantially.
No, it's not. It's increased. I've actually got the figures. It's actually increased.
Right.
Now, here's an interesting one. It's actually increased via an alternative route.
Yeah.
And no, not the shadow fleet, because that's just something the media have made up. That's rubbish. We can go through that as well. And
it was gone through Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan.
No, it hasn't. Now, this is an interesting...
In terms of like microprocessors.
This is a crazy one, this was. I didn't even know this is another one I didn't even know existed before I did the research. ESPO, the Eastern Siberian Pacific Pipeline. Now that then goes to, oh my God, I've got so many notes here. Through, I can't find them now. Anyway, you have to take my word for this because I can't find my notes. Through basically all the Asiatic countries, including China. And it goes to America. So actually, the exports haven't decreased at all. They've actually increased massively. So there's an interesting one. Because
why is Russia struggling with income? They're selling off gold.
Right, now that's a really interesting one. Why are they struggling with income? Well, no, they're not struggling with income because
they're selling gold then?
Because they're moving up, because it backs up a central bank currency. And this is fascinating. Now, this is a really, really weird one, and it took me a long time to look into this to make some sense of this. They're selling off not massive amounts of gold, in all honesty. They're selling some gold off.
The central bank's gone from 558 billion to 25 billion. Or million, sorry.
It's gone into gold and other resources. They don't care. Gold is...
The physical gold holdings have decreased dramatically.
And why? Because it backs up a central bank currency. Yes. That's the only reason. The moment you move away from the petrodollar and dollar hegemony, you don't need that much gold holdings. You just don't need it. If you've got resources.
Yeah.
Now, bearing in mind, they're also going to get hold of the Donbass region. That deal's already been done. Trump said it's been done. The United Nations have said it's done.
Assuming Ukraine agrees to it.
Oh, they've got no choice. So they have all agreed to it. That's agreed, because the deal was that they agreed to it provided they can get access to the EU, which the EU said yes.
There's a second in.
It's still in there, aren't they? Yeah. I don't know what to make of that. I'm not going to comment on that. So it's fascinating. I mean, what hit me was how much the petrochemical industry, which runs everything, the economics, everything else, is all immaterial. It doesn't matter what we discuss. It's immaterial, because without it, we're just shut down. We're shut down. It's 2.8 billion a day. A day.
Yeah.
So politics, all of it, means nothing. What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do?
You say 2.8 billion a day, that pales in comparison to government expenditure.
What's it backed up by?
Central bank, literally.
Well, they print money.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, and what happens then
government expenditure
when that dollar loses value? What happens when that dollar's worth is undermined?
Theoretically, imports drop, of course, but for the government, that's a great thing. The size of the debt is lesser.
It is. If inflationary pressure, that's the only way any government can get rid of debt. It inflates it away. America's country's going to be fine, because it's not a country, it's a corporation. American citizens are toast.
Yeah.
The standard of living is collapsing now. They're not going to get any wealth. How can you? Okay, the only way you can do that is if you're wholly self-sufficient and you're going to have an internalised market economy.
Yeah, it's an autarky,
Yeah.
Impossible.
Well, in my opinion, it is. It's possible for a certain period of time, but it's not sustainable.
It's not sustainable. Exactly.
I mean, Germany tried it, China tried it, America's done it once already. It works for a bit, but sooner or later you've got to have an export market. And it's cyclical. It's all cyclical. So what's right today isn't necessarily going to be right tomorrow or next week. But it's all resource-based.
Well, the US wants the yuan to increase in value because it's artificially decreased.
Apparently so. I mean, apparently so. China is not... we won't say it's maxed out exactly, but it's nearing a peak.
The demographics say definitely.
But
population's hit a plateau and is going to decrease.
But let's not pretend that the overall functioning element here is resources, be it, I don't know, iron ore, gas, oil, rare earths. Everything else is immaterial. Food, everything else is immaterial. It doesn't matter what governments say. It doesn't matter what they say they're going to do. Let's say you've got a large corporation. Here's a good one. Let's pick Dublin. That's a good one. So we sort of think, right, Irish citizens, it's not fair. Lots of homeless. They can't afford a house. There's these huge corporations there because they're given these massive tax breaks to go to Dublin. You know, they're given these corporate tax breaks and all the rest of it. And the government comes in and sort of says, look, we're going to tax you because it's unfair. You know, we've got people in the streets that are homeless. They've got a crap standard of living. It's going to tax the bejesus out of you. They're just going to move.
Yeah.
Not only are they going to move,
well,
they're going to move globally. And they'll just shut it down like that. It will be done within 48 hours. They'll just shut it.
And that's because it's non-tangible. That's the whole thing. So
Yeah.
this is one of the things with a land value tax.
Mm.
It's tangible land. You can't move land. The only
You
way
can't.
to get rid of land is nuke it, and no one in their right mind's obviously going to.
No,
do that.
absolutely.
So this is, just bringing it back to the land value tax.
Do
so.
This
is why land value tax is so important as a wealth tax.
Do so.
It decreases wealth equality
Yeah.
while avoiding capital flight entirely. Because you can't. How do you do capital flight under a land value tax?
Move
You
back
have to sell it.
Move back to Dublin and use your argument with let's say I've got in Dublin in the city there's a 3/4 acre plot of land, okay, and well, let's say the state or the government own it, okay, and or whoever or it's privately owned, doesn't matter, you pick your choice, okay,
Right.
doesn't really matter. You think, right, we'll develop it. We're going to put an office block on there. Let's say whoever owns the land, okay, and going back to your land tax, right, that you own the land and you think, right, let's call a developer in a construction company, and we'll pick, let's pick an office block for, I don't know, something like Amazon or Google. I tell you what, no, let's not. Let's pick an office block for, let's say, Deutsche Bank, okay, right, for their traders. So whoever owns the land, that's that, they own that. They get a developer in, office block goes up, and it's rented out. It's rented out to somebody like Deutsche Bank, okay?
Yeah.
And let's go back to the land tax again. You tell me how that would operate and who would be taxed on that.
The owners of the land.
The owners of the land would be taxed. Okay. So what?
Deutsche Bank.
No, they just rent the office space. They're renting it. They rent it.
From who?
From the owner.
Owner.
You pick one. Pick one.
Would say,
pick one.
Would you say if there's a landlord?
Yeah. Well, either.
But you tax the landlord.
Fair enough.
Not the renting.
Okay. No. That's right. You tax the land. Right. So the landlord either is the state or the government, or a I don't know, Fred Smith, some private individual who just, it doesn't matter. The landlord.
So the case of land value tax.
Okay. So what happens then if he says, "Oh, you're taxing me on this land as a land tax," and it's incrementally increasing each year, which is not likely to go
because
down.
He's raising his rents.
He's then going to raise the rent to Deutsche Bank, our tenant, in that building, the Deutsche Bank.
But
okay?
then the government taxes him more, man. More he raises rents for more land value tax.
Right. Who's the? It's an odd phrase. This that seems to have come back in modern times. Not the consumer or the customer. They're calling it the end user. So the end user in our instance, I mean, we could argue customer, but we'll say the end user in this instance is Deutsche Bank. Okay. So how do you imagine Deutsche Bank are going to react to increased rent? They've got two options.
Well,
how do you
not
think?
only is the landlord going to have to pay more tax, he wouldn't do it.
But they do increase their rent, don't they? To cover.
Yeah, but under a land value tax, they wouldn't, and I can give you many cases.
But they do. Every single landlord increases rent. Every single one. There's not a landlord in history if their tax is going to lower rent ever.
If it's Scranton in the US, they recently abandoned land value tax, and rents had been stagnant for 30 years, and after abandoning land value tax, rents went up. That's a real-world example where land value taxes have suppressed rents because landlords don't want to pay more tax. And that is without rent controls, that is without price caps.
So landlords are just happy to pay more tax.
They don't want to raise rents, so they don't pay more tax.
So you've got a fixed rental income despite overheads.
Essentially, I mean, they might raise tax with overheads, but that is unrelated to land value tax. See, when we talk about land value tax, that's purely the value of the land. So this is more getting into the nuances of it, and I'm happy you raised this point. If overheads increase, because the landlord has to pay the overheads, you could raise rents to cover that. That's different to just raising rents naturally as people's incomes increase, right? And this is a fundamental difference, is that a lot of the time incomes are swallowed up by rents. And that's what a lot of the time hinders productivity growth.
But the end user is going to end up paying more rent.
Yes, because of overheads, not because of price gouging.
So let's just stop at that point.
So income growth, real income growth, has increased massively. But purchasing power has also increased fairly a lot. But a lot of the reason for this disparity between income growth compared to real, actual disposable income is because rents consistently capture more and more and more income. Henry George identified this in the 1880s, in his book Progress and Poverty, and in the modern day it's as true as ever, because the state is no longer providing housing, for example, so now people have to go to private landlords who have a profit incentive, and they continue to raise their rents as incomes rise, not as their overheads rise.
But our end user, Deutsche Bank, at the end of the day, are going to be hit with higher charge.
And they'll move.
They will
Deutsche Bank is a mega corporation.
They'll just
of course
go.
They'll move. Yes.
They'll just go. So what happens then?
The land can be developed into something else, and
so you're going to lose that wealth, and it's going to pay them to move, because another country is going to go, you know what, we'll have the business.
Yeah, I guess.
So you're going to strip the wealth out of that country.
Not really, because
that's happening now in London.
The
that's
tangible
right
assets
now
are still there. The tangible, we don't. I mean, you literally made the case that when we started discussing about GDP, it's all about the money and everything, and not about the tangible, real goods. The building's still there. The people have just gone. You can replace that with a different company who might.
But you're back into the politics
and
that the state is then taking over, sort of saying, right,
no,
we're going to tax it one way or another.
But they're taxing land, not the capital or the labour. So if we had Henry George argued a 100% land value tax system where you purely tax land at 100% of its value every single year, so the land value prices would be collapsed because no one's going to be able to pay that much tax current land values. So
we strip out property ownership.
Essentially, yes. So we have
public
property ownership,
private
capital and private labour. Everyone's entitled to value of their labour, everyone's entitled to the value of their capital, but they aren't entitled to land because land is a public common that everyone should have benefit from. Obviously, we're not saying, everyone should be allowed in your house and everyone can live in your house.
No, I understand that. That's a fair argument. No, that's a fair argument.
Yeah,
I understand that. But you're actually saying that land ownership should not be permitted for individuals.
They own the land, but they just have to pay a very large tax on it. They have to pay 100% of the value of that land on the tax. So essentially, you have you buy land for $1,000, and then you pay $1,000 every single year, assuming land values don't increase.
So there's no real incentive for me to own land.
That is because you can improve that land and then extract profit from that land, and that's where the difference is. So a factory owns let's say the factory owns an acre of land, and they pay $1,000. They're very cheap. I mean, of course, we would have cheap land under a land value tax system. They pay £1,000 of land value tax on that land every single year. But that factory produces, let's say, £10,000 worth of goods, and that's on the low end, right, in terms of factories. So their profit margins on purely the land value tax is £9,000, and under a perfect Georgia system, we would just have a land value tax. So their corporation tax would be nil, their income tax of workers would be nil, and so actually productivity increases because we're no longer taxing productivity in the form of income tax or sales tax or corporation tax. We're purely taxing through land and the use of land, and they are using that land to actually increase the tangible wealth of a country.
But this exists already on commercial land.
How so?
Rightmove it.
I mean,
just go on to Rightmove.
So you can rent, yeah.
Just go on to Rightmove.
But in this case, the state, you're renting from the state essentially by paying this tax. That's the fundamental difference.
I don't want to rent from the state.
But you rent from a private landlord anyway.
No, I wouldn't. I'd own it.
Well, yeah, but you can own
I'd go buy it.
Then you can.
I don't want to pay tax on it.
You still own it. You just pay a tax on it, and then also.
Why should I pay tax on that if I've already worked for it? I've been taxed on that.
But you don't get taxed on an income in a perfect Georgia system. It's the system that I'm describing. There's no income tax. It's purely a land value tax.
There's not going to be no income tax on my labour.
That is the idea. In a Georgia system, I'm just describing you what Henry George argued for, and to an extent, I agree with. I think a land value tax is 100% land value tax is a bit of a pipe dream.
I mean, personally, I don't think there should be any tax on labour. I quite agree with you.
So theoretically, land is such a valuable and wealth-driven commodity that by taxing that, you could offset the tax on labour, and then you'd have 0% income tax, and it's all paid for through land value tax. Then as an individual, if you're a high income person, the idea is you buy a better house. But then it's still progressive because as a high income person, you're buying that better house, and then therefore you're paying a tax on it and paying a higher price. Or the other idea is you're a high income person, you want to stay very high income, so you don't necessarily buy a better house, you stay in a smaller house.
So what about national insurance? Will we get rid of that as well? Because that's just another tax because it's actually going into the same kitty now. So we're going to get rid of NI as well.
Like I wrote on my website, it's it continues the government funding. It's essentially a Ponzi scheme.
It is, absolutely.
The younger generations pay the national insurance, and that pays the pensioners.
Yeah.
And it just keeps going
absolutely.
and going.
What about VAT? We're going to get rid of that as well?
Well, theoretically, as I say, in Henry George, in his book, he has this chapter
just a land tax.
The single tax, and it's just a land tax. Now, there's been Georgist economists since him who have argued for a Pigovian and a severance tax. A Pigovian tax is like a tax on cigarettes. It's a negative behaviour, and it affects not just you, it affects everyone because of second smoking thing.
Yeah.
So we should tax that and then raise the income from that to pay for it.
So there will be tax on something.
So we'd be tax on negative externalities with Pigovian tax, of course, finite resources with a land value tax, and then more finite resources with severance taxes, which we've already discussed with Norway. Norway's tax on the extraction of oil is a severance tax. Severance tax is a tax on the extraction of a finite resource.
So that tax is passed on to the consumer.
No, because it's a finite resource.
How is the oil revenue not taxed?
Oil revenue is taxed. It's just the
taxes. Everything we buy is taxed.
If a oil company extracts 1 barrel of oil in Norway and 1 barrel of oil in Iran, that's the same barrel of oil. It's still a barrel of oil, right? It's a barrel of crude oil. It's just it costs them more to extract in Norway, and they have to pay that tax. And yet we see just literally you can just look, right? Norway still extracts oil. Of course it does. And yet that same barrel of oil in Iran and the same barrel of oil in Norway is priced the same thing on the world trade market. But that barrel of oil is extracted in Norway, and so what you're describing is people would stop extracting oil in Norway, but they continue to. And
if the price gets too high, there's no point in extracting it.
Of course, yeah, but that never has happened, and it doesn't happen.
But it is happening. It's happening right now.
Norway continues to mine oil.
It's happening right now.
How? If Norway's still extracting oil?
Norway's extracting existing reserves. There are a lot more reserves there, but it's actually costing more now to open those oil fields up, because what we're dealing with is a Brent crude sweet and Brent crude sour. A lot of it is now Brent crude sour. It's actually costing more to get it out than it is to process it in the petrochemical plants. Not worth getting out of the ground.
Yeah.
So what are you going to do?
But then you'd stop mining said oil.
In that case, you've got a problem with regards to your revenue, haven't you?
Except no, because Norway have implemented this Georgia system and have essentially predicted it, because they, as I said, they taxed for oil, and it didn't affect the oil's revenue.
It won't for maybe 50, 60 years.
The sovereign wealth fund has a cap. You can only withdraw 4%, and the interest of their sovereign wealth fund greatly exceeds.
But the interest
generally,
the interest is determined by the central banks.
The interest rate is nothing to do with the extraction rate of the sovereign wealth. The government of Norway can only take out 4% of the total value of the wealth fund to fund their activities. So of the 2.4 trillion that the Norwegian sovereign wealth fund has, the government
that then gets devalued.
only takes out 4%.
That's then devalued, because
The sovereign wealth fund gets devalued.
Of course it will, because
but it owns tangible assets.
At the moment, but if you're running out, those tangible assets like that can be bought and sold. The moment your currency starts becoming devalued, that's on the open market. That's going to get shorted into oblivion. The forex trader is going to short that into oblivion. Then what?
I don't understand what you're saying, because if they have the tangible assets and the value of money goes down, those tangible assets still exist and are tangible assets. So the purchasing power just decreases. But it's not like the Norwegian wealth fund is holding $2.4 trillion. It's holding $2.4 trillion in assets, which then, as the dollar devaluates, they increase in value in proportion to the dollar, because they're, again, tangible assets.
Right. Well, as you're right, you can't buy or sell anything, well, oil specifically, unless it's in the US dollar. You just can't do it. I mean, it's been traded now in the ruble and the yuan.
And the euro as well. Iran sells oil in euros.
Very, very little in the euro, and it's done via...
As I say, it's Iran and things to avoid sanctions.
It's done via digital envelope with symmetric and asymmetric encryption, and that's done on open seas anyway. That's not done country like that. That's done,
like I say, it's
that's done on open sea trading. That's something entirely different. So sooner or later, we can argue and argue and argue. You've got a finite resource; it's going to deplete. Your sovereign wealth fund is that is it? What's the currency there? No, they haven't got the euro, have they?
Norway.
Is it like a krona? It's a crown. It's a crown, isn't it? Sooner or later, that's going to get devalued. As soon as it's devalued, what are you going to do?
What, the krona?
with your sovereign wealth fund, because your sovereign wealth fund effectively decreases.
Your sovereign wealth fund is in dollars, but again, it's in assets. So if a dollar decreases in value, the value of those assets briefly may devalue because the market doesn't react instantly. But if the dollar devalues by say 10%, theoretically the value of
But
those assets,
Norway's reliant on imports. To pay for those imports, it's going to be paid with their sovereign currency. If the sovereign currency is devalued,
the sovereign wealth fund is in dollars, though.
It is, but you've still got to pay for those imports.
The imports are in crowns. These
Yes,
are two detached currencies.
No, they're exactly the same thing. They're linked, aren't they? They're linked.
I mean, you can say that because of how interconnected the global economy is.
How are you going to pay for imported goods with a devalued currency?
But okay, so for example, we'll just use the sovereign wealth fund as an example. They could sell off assets from a sovereign wealth fund, get dollars, and
as I said at the outset, in this case, you're going to deplete your resources, either tangible or financial. They will be depleted sooner or later.
Okay, but again,
we've even got a timeline on it.
We even started at the very beginning saying how much money Norway has in proportion to its population. The sovereign wealth fund is so vastly huge that it's impossible to think it would ever tangibly run out, even if there's these operations value of the crown.
It can't not run out.
Especially
Nothing's
because
forever, is it?
Again, I mean, yeah, but like especially also as we said, Norway has these tangible things. They have countless hydro dams producing thousands of megawatts of power. They have huge amounts of a power economy and energy economy. What's called the electro state, which is unique because Norway is both an electro state, and in terms of that, they have a lot of electricity to do production with, and they're a petro state in terms of course, they have a lot of petrol oil to extract. Norway is a perfect case study for the modern sort of these unique economies that arise from the trends of electro, data center, and the petro fundamental oil is. Yeah.
But they can't survive without oil. And if they run out, they're going to have to import it.
Yes, and then they have the electro state to support that because their electricity is so cheap and so abundant. You can go start up, say, even using an extreme example, a Tesla gigawatt factory, which, as the name implies, it takes up a lot of energy, and yet they can use said energy because it's so cheap from Norway, but the factors of production just make it an attractive place to build a factory.
But you need oil for everything.
There's alternatives. In a lot of UK cities.
How
Give me an example where...
Give me an example of how you're going to live without oil. The lights are going to go out. The lights are going to go out. Every power station, every nuclear plant, every hydroelectric station, every wind turbine, everything needs oil.
Okay, but even then, right, we're not going to... This isn't a system where we're getting rid of oil. And you can recycle
But you've not got any. As Norway, you're running out.
You can turn plastic into oil. And this is actually a great example because, yes, you can turn plastic into oil and it's very energy intensive. And this gets back to the electro state. The electro state, in the Norway example, in the Paraguay example, in all of these examples where there's electro states, where there's essentially they have so much electricity that they not only export it to foreign countries, they also have these cheap electricity domestically to allow for investment. Plastic can be converted into oil. It's just very energy intensive. So therefore, in the Norway electrostate example, they can actually continue oil exports. It's just they import plastic.
You can't export oil like that. It's Brent crude sweet. You know, it's got a very low sulfur content.
That can be made through various processes. I forget these processes, but you can make petrol out of plastic.
You can, but you can't do enough to be viable. It's too energy.
It's too energy intensive. But this is exactly what I got to: is that they have huge electricity reserves.
But you can't do it. You can't do it on a financially viable basis.
Why not? Fusion, for example, is right around the corner, and that will.
Well, we're talking about what's happening in the future,
solar is
not
on
now.
Such a large scale, solar could easily replace it.
Well, let's see. I mean,
so there's.
I suspect that
like doomsday prophecy you have of running out of oil is still sort of not necessarily true.
I don't think we're going to run out. I think what's going to happen is I don't think it's going to work like that. I think sooner or later you're going to see economic collapse. With economic collapse, you're going to see population reduction. With population reduction, you're going to see
birth rate's already dropping.
It is absolutely
population.
You're going to see reduced demand one way or another. If you've got reduced demand, you've got less pressure, if you like.
There's been this idea of degrowth.
No.
You don't think you think there's going to be a reduction in demand, but you don't think there's going to be degrowth.
I think there'll be right. I think there's going to be a reduction in population growth. I think that's decreasing now. What I'm saying is, I don't think it's a doomsday scenario. And if anything, I see it as a more positive. I think actually standards of living could bizarrely actually increase.
And you don't think the fact that the population decreasing means not many birth rates, we have an aging population, which means, as we've described very earlier and before this, is that as we have an old elderly population with our pension system, Ponzi scheme, do you think material wealth will increase when this Ponzi scheme gets more and more and more pressure on the economy?
I think the Ponzi scheme is going to collapse.
Right.
I don't see it. How is it sustainable? Look.
As I say, the Singaporean model makes sense, where they've actually invested it.
Yes, it does.
But the way most Western countries, US, the UK, France, most European countries.
No, it doesn't. I think most Western countries are going to collapse. I think the USA economically, and I'm going to be very specific. For the citizens, will collapse. I think the USA as a country is going to be fine. I think your Singaporean model will work economically.
Yeah,
it will be very, very successful. Same as it is in the Netherlands. The Netherlands is very, very similar. Okay, and equally, as freedom of choice for an individual, and it's just a personal thing. Do I want to live like that? No, I don't.
Right.
No, I don't. Does it work? Absolutely, it works.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it doesn't work. The Singaporean model is, they've got it spot on like they have in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
The Netherlands, they've got great healthcare, great standard of living, great education, very, very healthy population, tiny amount of unemployment, but...
Well, it's about how the government spends the money, not how much.
Well, interestingly enough, in the Netherlands...
Again, also gets back to the GDP argument.
Let's just go back to...
I just want to bring it back to the...
Go on.
It's that, yes, GDP... The other thing that GDP doesn't represent is, of course, it factors in government spending, but it doesn't factor in the sort of where it's spent. So you can spend 1,000 on pensions, and what they're going to go do is just spend it on food. But you could then spend 1,000 on capital enterprise, and that's going to boost productivity.
Right.
So that's the other thing about GDP.
Let's go back to this business of drawing parallels between Singapore and Netherlands. The Netherlands, regardless of which political party in government, it's in their constitutional law that a certain amount or percentage, I can't remember, you'll have to, is actually spent on for the benefit of the citizens. Obviously coastal defence, and maritime facilities such as ports, the port facilities and all that.
Yeah.
That no government that's in there at the moment has a choice in that. That's in the Constitution.
Yeah.
They can vote on other things, obviously, but they can't vote on not spending a certain percentage of the. Going back to your point about land tax, that they do not have a choice. That has to be spent on certain things. Same in Singapore.
Yes.
So I'm not disagreeing with the mechanics of this. I'm disagreeing on a personal level.
It's all politics, yeah. And this is something I've been discussing a lot with many people, is that a lot of economics is politics. And this is one of the fundamental failures with modern economics and liberal economics, is that, as you said, the system works, but it's literally just on your personal opinion that you don't want to live in that.
I don't.
And that's purely politics. That's purely your political stance.
Yeah.
And there's no reason. I mean, it's not. I'm not saying it's like, oh, you're evil because you don't want the system. That's just how you are. That's just your opinion.
I don't.
I think the reason that I think a lot of Georgists sort of want every country to adopt the land value tax, and I don't think so, because you need. I mean, the fact that we have 196 different countries with 196 different constitutions, 196 different sets of laws, that's great.
But you can't argue against the land tax using that. You have to, if you're going to operate, let's say something like there is in the Netherlands or Singapore, you have to have that land tax.
Yeah,
what I'm saying
absolutely.
Is, all I'm asking as an individual is for any government, any politician, any political party, is to leave me alone. And they won't. They can't. And it doesn't matter who's
there's no okay.
Just leave me alone.
In the UK, for example, other than the Green Party, no other party wants a land value tax. And that's purely political. because they themselves,
Right.
a lot of people in government
Right.
are fairly wealthy. Keir Starmer has a net worth in the several million,
Right.
for example, and he was literally a lawyer. But there's not many lawyers getting several millions. You know, he's certainly accepted something somewhere. Anyway,
Of course, I agree with you on that.
Yeah.
But
So the point being is, land value tax isn't implemented, even though, as we've described in Singapore, it works perfectly. Isn't implemented by these politicians because they themselves own a lot of land and don't want to pay more tax.
Very high land value tax, incidentally, going back to this, in the Netherlands. Also a massively high land value tax, not on agricultural, not on residential, but on commercial and industrial tax,
Of course.
in this country and Ireland.
Yeah.
Now,
and that hurts productivity.
you know what? I'm not even going to get into that. I don't even want to touch that,
Right.
because I'm trying to fight this cause of yours for a bit on this land value tax.
Okay.
And don't misunderstand me. I'm not disagreeing with it from an economic point of view, or for the benefit of, let's say, a population who want healthcare.
Yeah.
They want decent infrastructure. They want good government services, police, fire, healthcare, ambulance, education, and all that. I am saying, as an individual, leave me alone.
Right.
I don't want to pay your land tax. I want you to leave me alone.
And how do you fund those things?
I'll do without them. I don't care about them. That's what we've got a constitution for in the States, of a Second Amendment. Leave me alone.
Yeah.
I don't want a land value tax, because I figure if I've started out with nothing, I'm born at the end of the day. Sovereign citizen. I've been born with nothing, and I've worked and I've created wealth through labour. Why should I be taxed on it?
You don't get taxed on labour, is the idea. It's a single tax. You get taxed on land ownership, because if you as an individual own land, that's taking away the right to own that land from someone else. You should pay a tax for that.
What happens if I work harder than somebody else? Shouldn't I have more than them?
Exactly, and so as a result, you can own that land and pay that tax because you're working harder than that
So
individual.
I'm being taxed.
If that individual
I'm being
isn't working,
taxed for working harder. That's
no,
ridiculous.
of course, no, but what?
You can't tax me for working harder.
You're getting taxed more for owning more land.
Hang on
If
a
you
minute.
work harder, there's no
That's
reason-
deciding what I buy
there's
with
no-
my money.
There's no reason that if you work harder, you should buy more land. You could
Okay.
work harder and stay in the same house and use that excess income.
Okay, I'll
invest yourself
buy
somewhere
precious metals then.
else. Okay, yeah.
Let's forget
There's
land.
no
for a minute.
reason why you shouldn't be able to. Of course you can.
I can't though,
Why not?
because it's taxed.
It isn't.
Yes, it
under,
is.
Under a Georgia system, it isn't.
Well, that's under that system. Under the present
This
system,
is the system I'm
it's
arguing
taxed.
for, and you're arguing against. No, you
Well,
argued against land value tax.
I'm
and now you're
arguing.
against the whole
I'm
different
arguing.
system.
If I've worked harder than anybody else,
Yeah.
and I want to buy land, why can't I buy land? I can, but you're going to
You
tax
can
me.
buy land, but you're going to tax it, yeah.
Why should I be taxed on something I've worked for?
Because you're taking away the right to own that land from someone else.
I'm not. They've got equal opportunities. They can work hard like me. That's their decision not to work
but
as
if
hard.
you own a specific plot of land, you own that land.
Of course I do, because I worked my arse off for it.
Yes, and the only time you'd ever sell it is for a profit margin, theoretically, as most people do.
Well, that's called capital gains tax. That exists already.
Not necessarily.
Well, it does.
Because capital gains tax only kicks in after you sell it. You're selling.
It's still
you're
a
getting
tax.
taxed for selling that land.
The UK
Whereas
government
this is the
calls it
fundamental
capital
difference. The
gains
capital
tax.
gains tax only kicks in after you sell the land. So it's literally punishing you for selling the land. The fundamental difference with the land value tax is you're constantly taxed on that land. So rather than being taxed when you sell
So why
it, you're
should I be
taxed for
taxed
owning
on
it.
something I've worked for?
Because it's basic behavioural economics, right? If you
Hang on
don't,
a
if someone
minute.
doesn't want to sell land, they're going to hold on to that land, and that's going to artificially inflate.
No,
the
I don't want
value
to
of
sell
land.
it. I want it. If somebody else has got the same opportunities as me,
Yep.
and they decide not to work as hard as I do,
Yep. They can't
why
own
should I be
land.
penalised?
Then they can't own land. They're
don't let them.
penalised by not being able to own land.
Right, okay, well, that's their choice, isn't it?
Yeah, but then what are they going to do? They don't necessarily get access to a house. They don't necessarily get
Well,
access
work
to
then.
anything.
Work then, like
Exactly,
I
and then they have to pay tax on the land that they own.
do. Well, like I do, but it's the amount, isn't it? We're talking about amounts of taxation.
Because land is... high values on land is economically inefficient.
High values of land are economically inefficient.
Because
okay.
if you own... If you're one company, and you can build a factory on an acre of land that's £1,000, or a factory on an acre of land that's £10,000, of course you're going to pick the £1,000 for an acre, right? Because it's just cheaper. Your factors of production are lower. So why shouldn't we have a land value tax to deflate the value of land to therefore make...
But that
factors of
exists
production more
already
efficient? How so?
with commercial and industrial land. That's already there.
No, it isn't.
It's on Rightmove.
Yeah, okay.
It's a 20-second Google
That's
search.
different land usage zoning. That's different to a land value tax. Which
No, it's exactly a land value tax. That's how it works. It's
you
graded.
don't pay a tax on the unimproved value of your land.
Yes, you do.
No, you don't.
According to Google, you do.
Okay, you're just wrong.
Okay, well, Google's wrong. I don't know. I think
I don't know
at that point, if you can go on Rightmove, you can go on Property Pal, you can go on, oh crikey, I don't know, Masons, you can go on Savills. The only one that's not, interestingly, is agricultural land. Unless it's...
I'm really trying to figure out, because you're just wrong, right?
Okay.
So you think you're taxed on the unimproved value of land on industrial land? A land value tax is a tax on the unimproved value of land.
It already exists.
An unimproved value of land.
Absolutely on an improved value of land.
Unimproved.
Unimproved, because it depends where it is and what's surrounding it.
Yeah, exactly. That's the whole point of the land value tax. But that isn't how the taxation system works.
It is when I'm paying it. Let's say I buy industrial land, okay, and even if there's nothing on it at all, absolutely nothing, right? I'm still taxed on it. If I have a building on it, it's taxed again at an even higher rate.
Yeah, exactly, and that's the whole point. You should
even if that building's empty.
No, wait, exactly. You just proved my point. You shouldn't pay a higher tax if there's a factory on it. And yet, under a land value tax system, you wouldn't pay a higher tax because it's the unimproved value of that land. You pay either the same amount of tax on the unimproved land, which is, as I say, the concrete delivered place in Birmingham, or you pay the same amount of tax on that land with a factory on it, which is now increasing the output. And that's why a land value tax makes sense. Because these lands still have the same value because, as you said, the surrounding factors. It's just the difference is one has an output and one is doing nothing. And the reason why you would want to have a land value tax is to incentivize that output. And of course, either way, it captures the value of that land for the government to then reintroduce to re-spend it elsewhere.
What happens if the business I've got on there is not profitable, or not as profitable as I hoped it would?
Well, then, of course, you'd either shut down and then therefore there'd be a more efficient use of that land.
How, if there's nothing on it?
Well, then the government owns it, and then that allows
that.
And then, that's a good thing because that deflates the land prices.
There you go. So how would the government own it if I privately own it?
Because you're not paying taxes on it, so either the government seizes it.
So the government's going to take it off me.
Essentially, yeah.
That's exactly the point I was trying to make. That's exactly it.
So if you
so I either pay tax on that, or the government's going to take it off me.
Well, yeah, because you want an effective use of that land.
Right.
That's what again, it goes back to what I was saying. It's a politics versus an economic argument.
Yeah.
I'm arguing it's economically efficient and it makes sense and it allows more public investment. And then you're arguing politically that you don't want the government to take land off you, which you can't afford because that's just.
I can afford it. I've paid for it.
No, you can't afford the tax.
I know I can't afford the tax, and I'm unwilling to pay the tax on it.
Well, if you could use that land.
Why should the government take something off me that I've worked for?
I mean, okay, in the first place, if you're buying an acre of derelict land in Birmingham, you're clearly very rich. So there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to.
So you're going to tax people for being successful?
No, you're going to tax people for owning land that's
But to buy that land, you have to be successful.
Yes. And then if you're successful, you can invest in a factory or something. Or,
well, I don't want to invest
anything. You could invest in anything and at least make some profit.
But that's the government dictating to me.
You could place a 1 acre car park, and that would still raise some profit because people are paying for that parking space. And that would still be more economically efficient than having a brownfield site that does absolutely nothing for the economy.
Okay.
And that's, I say, you disagree based on political grounds.
I disagree on freedom of choice and freedom of the individual.
Okay, and that's a political thing because you assume that owning land is freedom of choice.
It is, yeah.
Rather than owning land and paying a tax on it for the benefit of the common person.
Freedom of choice is in the United Nations Human Rights Charter.
Yeah. But they have the choice to buy land elsewhere. That freedom of choice still exists.
I'll buy it in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, feel free. And then you can develop land.
And then I'm going to get taxed again.
Yeah, but very, very little.
Well, that's called that. Hang on a minute. That's going to be graded ratios of taxation.
Yeah, it's because it's a progressive tax. As I say, it's the land value tax. It's taxed based on the value of that land. Of course, an acre in the middle of the wolds is going to be taxed differently compared to an acre in the very middle of London.
Well, we've already covered that because we've already said there's no tax on agricultural land.
No, but under a land value tax there would be.
Right, okay. Like I said, there's no choice then, is there? Under that system, I'm given no choice. So if I work hard, and as you said, I'm depriving somebody else of that choice because I've worked hard, the government disagrees with that and wants to tax it, even though I've already been taxed on it. And I'm going to continue to be taxed on it for something I've already worked for. That's not freedom of choice.
Gen Z in the US work up to 80 to 100 hours, right? Mm-hmm. And that's not necessarily on average, but a lot of them are working 80 to 100 hours. That's simply so unaffordable because they can't buy a house. Right. Boomers worked an average of 40 hours, even on the high end, maybe 60
Why can't they buy a house?
They can't buy a house because the land prices are unaffordable. In the US, in some places, it's up to 60 to 70% of land prices goes into the price of a house. So when you're a developer, you buy the land and then build the house, and almost all of the cost goes into buying the land, not developing the house. If we had a land value tax to deflate the value of land, housing would become very affordable, as I gave with the example in Scranton in the US. Mm-hmm. Scranton, the aggregate property value went from 600 million to several billion after removing the land value tax. So when they had the land value tax, property prices were suppressed and affordable. After removing it, they were unaffordable and no longer, it massively increased the factors of production and other things, and also the individual cost for a living space.
Okay.
So a land value tax makes it more affordable for people to get on a property ladder.
Okay.
It does make it more expensive to continue to be on a property ladder, but arguably that's good because it means people have to stay productive. It incentivizes people to work more, yes, and that's good for the economy. And you can make the argument that no, the individual needs some downtime. But again, that's another political thing. You study Strathian economics and the share of wage versus profit and other things. I mean, fundamentally, there's various ways you could see that a land value tax is still progressive and allows for plenty of leisure time. It's just people who want to work harder can therefore earn more.
So if this land, let's pick your US example, it's going to be taxed.
Yes, as it was in Scranton. I'll keep on the Scranton example.
No, it's fine. I can't get any internet connection here for some. So what's the price of a building plot in Scranton?
So I'm not sure. I only know the aggregate. I've looked at the macro.
No, give me an aggregate.
As I said,
a building plot.
The aggregate value of all land in Scranton was some 600 million odd, and after removing land value tax, it was
no per billion. Plot.
I don't know per plot. As I said, I only know aggregates. I only know the macro. Okay. I'm not as educated.
I'll tell you. After 43 years in the construction industry, I'll tell you how this works. Right, the majority of the cost is in getting it out of the ground.
Yes.
60% of your cost for a property are getting that damn thing out of the ground. So that's your footings. You've got to dig them out. There's no option. You've got to dig them out. You've got to fill them with concrete. And then you put your house up. It doesn't matter whether it's brick built. It doesn't matter whether it's timber framed. It doesn't matter if it's steel framed. So your footings are down there. You sit whatever you want on it. Now, the issue you've got then is you've got to pay for your materials.
Yeah.
You've then got to pay for your groundwork team. You've then got to pay for your... Well, we'll do one in brick. In brick and block. You've then got to pay for your masons. You've got to pay for your plumbers. You've got to pay for electricians. You've got to pay for your joiners. You've got to pay for roofers. And you've got to pay for your final finish people. The company's got a plot of land and you want to put a house on it. Whether it's an individual, a small family building or a conglomerate. The house has to be built.
Yes, of course.
So you're going to get your surveyor on there. There's roads to put in. Lighting to put in, services to put in, telecommunications, water, gas, electric.
And this is the shocking thing, that's all only 40 to 30% of the cost. Buying the land is the predominant cost here.
Right, undeveloped building land is because there's no services. Cost is in the service.
Of course, but buying that land is... I'm using these extreme examples just so that you can understand where we could be, right? As I get, so for San Francisco, right, one of the highest land value prices on earth, development of that land is as high as 60 to 70% of the total cost.
So, who is going to pay all your tradespeople?
I've got the company employing.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And who pays that company?
The profits, which are selling houses.
Right, so who buys the house at the end of the day? The person who wants to live in it.
Yes.
Right, the end user. And we're back to this end user. So if you've got an electrician there, and a plumber there, and a bricklayer, and a joiner there, and a roofer there, they all need paying.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. Well, I'm very sorry. If you can't do it, you're going to have to pay for it. So if you're not going to be willing to get your hands dirty, and you're not going to build a house yourself, you're going to pay for skilled trades.
Of course you are, yes.
Okay.
But my whole argument is that land value prices are inflating this cost. You've just argued that labour costs are inflating it, which I agree with. We should pay labourers a fair pay. And I wouldn't disagree if housing prices were so high because of labour prices. But that's not true. House prices are so high because of land. I mean, obviously, there's some examples where this isn't true, right? But
like building materials, because they've gone through the roof.
Building materials have gone through the roof.
I've got accounts at MKM's, Jewson's, and Hughes Gray. They've gone stratospheric.
Yes, but land prices have also gone through the roof, and land prices, as I say in these extreme examples, but even in local examples, but in extreme examples, they can be as high as 60 to 70%. So if they're this high, right? If land prices are this high, then taxing it to deflate this would fundamentally allow for easier.
No, because if I'm building a house, I want paying. Who's going to pay me?
If you're building what? If you have a land value tax, it makes buying land cheaper, but holding land more expensive. And if you're a developer, you're not holding land for a particularly long period of time. You're buying that land, developing it, and selling it, which may be, I mean, even in the long run, right? That's at most maybe 10 years. I mean, as I say, I'm not that experienced in the building industry. You're more experienced.
Well, only 4 decades, but anyway.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm sure.
I'm saying to you,
understand.
If I come round here and you want your house rebuilt,
here's a bad example because of low land value prices. Here's a very bad
example. I want
example.
paying. How are you going to pay me?
You're going to pay them the wages.
Yeah, right. How are you going to pay me?
By making a profit from selling the house.
No.
What?
Right. Let's say you want a house, right?
Yes.
And whether land's taxed or untaxed or whatever you want to do, okay? And I build you a house. How are you going to pay me? You have to do something useful to pay me.
Do you work?
Right.
Yeah?
Yeah.
And then from that work, you gain an income. And save that income and buy a house.
Right, okay.
Or a mortgage.
Right, okay. So what actually boiling down to then is how useful the individual is.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Right.
That's just how economics work.
But the last time we spoke, I said to you that the way this was going to work is we remove, and Elon Musk agrees with it, and so does your Cambridge University, by the way, with their publication with the Club of Rome, Limits to Growth, that it will work on a system where you've got, and the banks are moving over, slowly, but are moving over to a system whereby each person, this eloquent, and I can't articulate this, has got an intrinsic worth. So let's say you're an estate agent.
Yep.
No, let's pick someone else. Let's say you're an accountant. It's highly unlikely with the advent of technology that you're going to be very useful. Let's pick something that people don't find very useful. I don't know. There must be some job out there that people sort of think, Christ, we can do without. Anyway, whatever. But technology is going to reap.
Call centres.
Yeah, thank you. Call centres. Okay. So how then are you going to pay me if you're an accountant or work in a call centre, if you've got no intrinsic value?
But this is actually perfectly lining up with my Georgist argument. You have a citizen's dividend, as it was called in Progress and Poverty, and what is more familiarly known as today as a universal basic income.
Yeah. What can I say about that? They've trialled it in Scotland, Canada. So what do you do then when you've got not insubstantial percentage of the population that you're going to give UBI to? How does that work?
Well, UBI, the idea is universal basic income, which would be everyone gets paid this. And then the workers, for example, if you work in an industry that hasn't been affected by automation, or these workers can obviously benefit from, they have the UBI plus extra income in their job, and that's the benefit. But to keep the economy alive, you need everyone to have UBI, and that can come from several things. That can come from a land value tax. That could come from automation tax. Which I would argue for an automation tax.
We're back to tax again.
Let's see if there's another fundamental disagreement. You just taxes.
I don't disagree with taxes. I disagree with who's imposing them why they're imposing them.
Well, yeah, because you need taxes.
Where they're imposing them.
You need taxes.
And on what they are imposing
You need taxes
them.
to stop inflation, which is the main MMT
But
argument. And
that's just taken one element. I've just mentioned 5.
Yeah, but as I said, I just said a land value tax and automation tax. We've already debated land value tax to death, and we just carry on with. But then an automation tax, I don't see how you could possibly do an automation tax.
An automation tax.
So let's say I give it in a very basic example. So it's very easy to grasp the concept, right? If you replace a Tesco cashier who's paid the minimum wage, which is going to be £15 an hour, so
okay, yeah,
an hour.
You
replace the Tesco cashier with a robot.
Yeah.
Now you tax that company using that robot £15.
I'll shut the company down then. I'll shut it down.
You'd shut down a company.
Yeah, I'll shut it down. I'll shut it down. Yeah, I'll shut it down. So if you're going to tax me, I'll shut it down. Or I will add the taxation element onto the price of my goods. You've got a choice. Either I'm going to increase the price of the goods, or I'll shut it down.
But if you increase the price of goods, no one will buy from you.
Okay, I'll shut it down then. I'll move it.
So
I'll move it. I've got an entire planet. I'll move it.
But in the UK,
I'll move it.
As I said with Tesco, how are you going to move Tesco outside of the UK without losing your customer base?
I easy will. I'll just shut it down and set it up elsewhere. That's why we've got a global economy. That can be done easy as wink.
That doesn't make any sense. So, but the building of Tesco would still exist, and therefore it could be bought by someone else to make profit from.
Not if it's not making profit. If you're going to tax me out of injustice, I'm just going to shut it down.
I literally just said you either have a worker being paid £15 an hour, or essentially a robot being taxed at £15 an hour.
I'm not going to be taxed on that.
That's the same cost. The cost is the exact same.
I'll shut it down. The moment
what?
Well, of course I can. I can do it to my company. I'll do exactly what I want.
Your factors of production stay as the exact same price.
It's my choice as a business owner to do what I want with my business. I'm not being dictated to by a government.
All right, well, but we'll feel free to, and then a different business will take
Absolutely.
A different business will take up that opportunity to maintain the exact same profit margin, potentially with a better profit margin because of a productivity introduced by automation. Like it just fundamental. Like, okay, I mean, again, you're disagreeing on political grounds, not economic. Because I'm disagreeing on purely economic grounds. I'm just going to move it. The factors of production have saved,
which is why we've seen offshoring. This has already happened. This has already happened in Germany. It's happened in France, and it's happened in America. That it's cheaper to shut that company down. Here you go. I'm wearing a pair of Dickies work trousers. Okay, American company. All right, they're manufactured in Bangladesh. Because the production costs are too high in the States. So I'm just going to shut it. That's exactly what's happening.
Tesco, the example I gave, is a service. If you offshore Tesco to a different country, that means you've shut down the Tesco stores in the UK.
Yep. I'm going to shut them, yeah.
So then either a different company, let's say Aldi, takes up that market share, or a different company buys that Tesco location.
Just shut it. It's the same as the car manufacturers. The moment I'm going to get taxed, I'll shut it.
The store still exists. The labour still exists, the automation still exists. And as I said, the automation tax versus a minimum wage will be roughly the same. I mean, you could even argue the minimum wage is £15, let's make the automation tax £10 an hour for the robot. And now, if it's more profitable, I'll keep it there. Okay. So if it's profitable, I'll keep it. If it's not, then the automation tax revenue can be used to pay a citizen's dividend or a universal basic income. Provided my profit margins are higher, I will keep it there. The moment they're impeded or infringed upon, I'm going to shut it down. Okay, so you have okay, but that would still mean someone else could buy it and employ the labour and avoid the tax. The way to avoid the tax is either, as you say, shut it down or employ labour. Hang on a minute. So if we had an automation tax at £20 an hour for a robot worker compared to a pre-existing human worker, then it would make more economic sense to employ the human worker at £15 an hour than the robot worker at £20 an hour tax. Doesn't work like that. Yeah, it does. That's basic money for those. I mean, how does it not work like that? Well, because you've got long-term liabilities, you've got pension liabilities, you've got... so the robot is still more expensive, but is arguably still cheaper than, no? A robot, if you're spending, because it's for £50. Well, I think I've just covered that. I've just said, if the profitability is higher, I'll keep the business there. The moment the profit margins hit, I'm going to shut it down. With an automation tax for profit margins the exact same, though. Tesco still operates at £15 an hour minimum wage. It's just the fact that if we had an automation tax, if they wanted to automate that labour, it would cost them more. They would still continue to operate. It's just that it would cost them more to automate that labour. And even if they did automate that labour, that would pay into it.
It's cheaper to automate it. You've got long-term liability.
Unless you have the tax.
Sick, maternity, pensions, or holiday, employers, Class 1 NI contributions. There's so much tax as a business. And this is what's happening at the moment in this country. That lots and lots of businesses, it's not one a week, it's 2 or 3 a day, are shutting down because of taxation.
But an automation tax would raise revenue for that to pay universal basic income.
Right. Let's say you automate your Tesco's. Let's go back to that example. Right.
Yeah, I think Tesco's a very good example.
It's a great example.
Not only is it a high employer, also a lot of our employees are low wage, a minimum wage.
Well,
and also it fundamentally is required to exist in the economy so that people can buy something.
Right.
It's the perfect example for an automation tax.
So let's go back to the example of Tesco's, like you say, and you automate, which makes absolute sense. That's happening already. It's already happened in Japan. It's already been done in Japan.
Yes.
With their trolleys, you've got a card thing. I don't know what you call them.
I'm familiar.
I don't know what they call them. You stick your card in the trolley. You self-scan into your trolley, put your bins of beans or whatever you're buying, and scan your card onto the trolley. So it's already automated. That's fine. The moment I'm hit as a company with a taxation that makes it less profitable than employing workers, I'm going to shut it down.
Right. But why wouldn't you just continue to employ workers? You could go back to employing workers.
No, because that's not how businesses run.
But that store still exists.
There's not a single business on the planet that runs in a sort of way that's going to be charitable. They're in business to make money.
That store still exists, and they could still employ labour, and then therefore they could still make a profit margin.
Right.
I mean, you're not. You said
Can I explain how business works?
You aren't using the Tesco example I gave. The Tesco example is you have £15 an hour for a worker.
Yeah.
You have £15 an hour on a robot.
Yeah.
No matter what, Tesco still already operate, as I say, with £15 an hour on labour.
Mm-hmm.
So even if we had that £15 an hour on automation, take away the sort of the pension liabilities and things. So let's say it's actually more profitable to pay £15 an hour to a robot because of the lack of those liabilities.
Well, keep it open then.
And you keep it open.
I'll keep it open.
So then why, in the first place, would you argue against, say, a £15 an hour automation tax on a robot? Because that was immediately the angle you took.
No, I'm saying it's the profitability on it. I didn't take any angle on it. I took a commercial decision on it.
I said £15 on a Tesco employer or £15 on a worker.
Well, because if you're going to tax me on that, I'll just shut it down.
But the automation tax is paying the same as a minimum wage. It's just instead this time it's a tax to then fund the universal basic income.
Any business, it doesn't matter what you're doing, whether you're selling oranges, when you're manufacturing computers, where you're, churning off rolls of wallpaper, they need to operate on a profit margin.
Yeah.
If I can increase my profit margin by automating wallpaper production rather than employing people, I'm going to do that. The moment the taxation...
It's just rational, right? Yeah, of course.
The moment the taxation hits, where my profit margins aren't increasing year on year on year on year, I'll shut it down and move it.
Of course, yeah. But as I say, that's just rational behaviour. That is basically...
I'm just going to shut it.
Yeah.
And then everybody's out of work and you've got no income.
But then you have...
And that's happening already, isn't it?
But then you have the automation tax to capture that. Because Tesco's profit margin is literally buying goods and then from, say, producers and selling goods to consumers. Their business model is essentially just being as middlemen.
I understand how retail works.
Yes, of course. All right. I'm just trying to get this point across. Right. So there's always going to be a business model in buying and selling goods. And if we had an automation tax on them buying and selling goods, why would they stop being in business when they could continue to extract profit?
Because it won't be on a right.
I know you need to continue to grow profits and continue to grow your stock.
Yes, that's right. Yes, that's right.
But I mean, you already predicted this earlier. You said population is going to decrease, which is going to decrease demand. So inevitably, we're going to see profit margins, not necessarily profit margins, just profit decreasing because we're going to be buying less goods and selling less goods. Tesco's a good example because it's a retailer. It sells predominantly food goods. So if they're buying less food and selling less food, their profit margin probably still stays the same.
It will stay exactly the same.
It's just difference. Their gross profit, the volume of their profit is
GDP.
Decreasing. Yes, but their profit margin
exactly so.
But their profit margin.
Well, that's how we opened this up.
The profit margin as a percentage is staying the same.
That's how we opened this conversation up. And I'm saying the moment as any business, be it wallpaper, be it Tesco's, be it anything else, is taxed to the point that I'm not increasing profits year on year on year. I'll just shut it and move it.
But again, that's fundamentally not going to happen if a global population starts to increase, as you said. There's nowhere to move.
Right. Well, it
Other
doesn't.
than sub-Saharan Africa, where incomes are nil.
That's an interesting one. The prediction is by the IMF,
Yes.
and the CIA World Factbook, is that, and some of the fastest growing economies on the planet are West Coast of Africa.
Yeah.
That Western economies, which we kind of agreed on, are going to decrease.
Of course.
They will.
That has to happen.
Yeah. And we're going to look at a massive decrease. Nothing particularly tinfoil hatty or peculiar like that, but we've got an aging demographic.
Yeah, so the GDP per capita might stay the same. As an aggregate, will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we are going to see, not just in this country, but if I say the Western economies, by that I mean New Zealand, Australia, Canada, Europe, and America. They're going to see population decrease. That's going to happen. Other countries are going to increase, if not massively, by some. There will be a substantial percentage of increase. So it's just going to be in a state of flux. But we're dealing with some decrease, some increase. That's the way that's going to be. But you can't tax companies into oblivion because they're going to move, and they're going to move to where their profit margins are.
As I just said, wouldn't tax companies into oblivion. It would stay the exact same as minimum wage potentially, except obviously the benefit is, of course, as you said, there's no pension liabilities, these workplace liabilities, these other liabilities. The liability is, of course, purely in the fact that they're paying the same minimum wage as they already were, but this time in a tax to fund universal basic income to offset the fact that we've lost this supply of labour, or the demand for labour, sorry.
Here's one for you. Let's work on another example then, because I don't think it's a great illustration. Let's try car factories.
Right.
Or...
which have already been automated to hell.
So. Yes, quite. Or
good example.
Well, I'll tell you what, let's pick a better one, mate. Just thinking about... Let's focus on taxation. Let's go on... No, let's use two. Let's use car manufacturing and steel production.
Right.
That if these global companies, let's pick Nissan up in Sunderland, get Honda, and let's pick Jingye. We won't call it British Steel at Scunny. We'll call it what it is, Jingye.
Yeah.
Don't get the government subsidies they want, right? And the financial assistance and here's the importance. Going back to your point about taxation, especially land taxation, because I love this business of this theory of land taxation, because it just doesn't stack, right? What's British Steel? How many people do they employ roughly up at Scunny?
Thousands.
Right.
Yeah.
What about Nissan and the supply chain?
It's a few tens of thousands.
Right. I'll tell you what. You tax me, I'm going to shut it down. Now deal with all the employment. I'm going to shut it down.
Okay, so
I'll shut it.
Taking a Sraffian economics example is that how you shut down end of a supply chain and that affects the entire supply chain as a whole, right? That's a very basic concept. But even if they shut it down, that factory still exists.
Then move it. It's already been happening.
You can't. Okay, you can move the factory, but you're not physically going to pick up that factory and move it.
Cadbury's.
That factory exists. That building exists. That building has been built.
It does.
It has a power supply.
Okay.
It has the people.
And then what are you going to do with it?
The state. Could
what are you going to do with it?
Either the state could step in and continue to run it, as we saw with British Steel very briefly.
The state's subsidising it. They're not running it. The state's subsidising it.
Yeah, but they arranged supply chain issues and things like that to bring in coal.
He's losing over £1 million a day.
Yes, of course. I'm not denying that. But what I'm saying is the state can step in and do that. And then,
but you can't sustain a losses like that.
You're sort of looking at it from a very, this exists, right? Like, this is how the economy works. But of course, we have to factor in AI. We have to factor in robotics coming in.
But the economy does work like I've said it does. It's either profit or loss.
No, I'm not disagreeing with that. But very soon we're going to have people. We're going to have people being replaced en masse with AI, with robotics,
right? And then what?
Things. And then we could fund that with an AI tax, automation tax.
But we just said I'll move it then.
But to what country? Well, every single country is going to need an automation tax.
Cadbury's just shifted.
They moved to Poland, yes?
Yeah, they're gone, mate.
Yeah, but again, they moved there because of cheaper labour.
I'll tell you who else has shifted.
They moved there because of cheaper labour, not because of automation tax. That's an entirely unrelated thing.
But they've moved because of their profit margins.
Yeah.
No business is going to stop where it's slammed for tax. In 1988, 87, 88, okay. I went over to, I was working in Eastern Europe, which had just come out of communist control.
Yeah.
And don't think I'm running it down, because I'm not going to run it down. There were several things that I thought were very good there. Firstly, if you wanted something, let's say you were a teenager and you wanted a stereo.
Yeah.
There was no shortage of stereos. If you wanted jeans, there were no shortage of jeans. The issue is this: you didn't get a choice of what. And I'm not criticising this. There was no choice of stereo. Is one type. There were no choice of jeans. There were plenty of them, but you didn't get, like, I don't know, what's it, Levi's, Wranglers, whatever. There was just one type. Shops. Okay, you're too young to remember, but it's if you bought lard or butter years ago, it came in very basic packaging.
Of course. Yeah.
And let's say you went into a shop, supermarket in some of the former communist countries. There was no shortage of food. That was rubbish. Honestly, there was loads of food in there, but there was no choice. One type of bread, one type of butter.
There was no branding.
No, there was no branding.
That's the difference.
There was no branding.
Because that's the brand image often adds value to a product.
Well, I don't even want to get into that at this point.
Yeah. I think that's just an interesting.
Yeah. There was no branding, but there was no shortage. Now, the other thing that was very good there, because everybody's always talking about the negative parts, and I'm about as right wing as you can imagine. So don't for 1 minute think I'm sort of promoting communism or socialism. I'm not.
I mean, of course, you disagree with land value tax.
Yeah. But I do wholeheartedly disagree. But the other thing was, old people were unbelievably they were taken care of quextremely well.
Yeah.
Extremely well. Now, the other thing was employment. Let's say, and I did know a lady actually, who qualified as a teacher and couldn't get a teaching placement. Very good. There just wasn't employment there. So they found her. Oh, I'll go on holidays as well in a minute. They got her a job as a bricklayer, right? So she got employment so there's that. There seems to be this misconception with these former Soviet countries that they were all sort of downtrodden, this, that, and the other. They weren't. It just wasn't the choice. And they sort of say, "Oh, there's no social safety net." That's not how it works. She got a job as a bricklayer, which was paid bricklayers' rates, so she could afford a flat, she could afford food, she could afford clothing. Now, here's the weird thing that I never knew: got 2 free state-paid holidays per year. Don't misunderstand with Singapore. Would Singapore suit me? No, it wouldn't. I don't want it.
Clearly not.
No. Nor do I want the Netherlands. And yet both these countries have got incredibly high standards of living. In fact, the Netherlands, I believe, you Google it, has got the welfare index for its citizens. I think it's ranking like number 1 or number 2 in the world.
I think Finland right now is number
1. Is Finland's number 1,
Finland's
is it?
very high.
There you go, okay.
Yeah. Netherlands is very high.
Yeah. Do I want to live
ranks amongst the Nordic countries?
Yeah. I don't want to live in the Netherlands under that regime. The Netherlands is a country. I love it. I think it's a fascinating place. I love the people. The very prosaic attitude. I love the infrastructure there. I find the ports fascinating. I find the diamond processing plants there. I find what they've done with the land reclamation fascinating. Do I want to live there? No, I don't. Singapore, extremely wealthy. Massive port there, massive financial centre, very vibrant, very dynamic, great people, very forward thinking, amazingly well run government. And the other thing I like about it is very, very low crime figures, fantastic place to live, but not for me.
Right.
What I'm saying is, as a citizen, as a human being on this planet, I want freedom of choice, and I do not want to be told that I'm going to have a land tax, or I'm going to be renting, or the government's going to interfere with me, or the politician's going to dictate to me what I do.
Market?
No, you can't have that. That doesn't work either.
What taxes would you argue for?
Oh God, You
have to have a tax in that case.
You do have to have a tax.
Exactly. So where would you argue for government? Not only where would you argue for
right,
but where would you argue for government intervention? Because if you don't want to have, you want to have choice.
Yes.
But equally so, you can't not have choice without some form of...
You have to have taxation.
Yeah, and you have to have government intervention.
You
so
do.
where would you allow government... or where would you want government intervention? Where would you want tax? Is what I'm trying to get at.
And at this line, we're going to have to save this for another interview, but at this line, we're and you are right in what you're saying, and you've nailed it. You've expressed that far more eloquently than I did. Yes, we do need taxation. And the question you put was, okay, all right, Simon, what taxation?
Yeah.
And the answer to that is, I don't know really, because I haven't thought about it, to be honest with you. My short, honest answer to that is I haven't thought about it, in all honesty, as to what taxes. Because let's just go back to that point of, we need healthcare, right?
Undeniably.
Whether
you couldn't have a modern system without health.
You have to have it. We need an education system, okay?
Yeah, the world economy relies on it.
We need law and order on the streets, so we need a police force.
Of course.
Let's just... We'll pick this anyway, and it's arguable, but personally I think we do need some form of military deterrent.
Yeah.
As a form of taxation. Yeah. So we agree on those points. And we need... we need some form of infrastructure. Let's say roads. Yeah, I don't really want to...
Very bare minimum, you need roads and rail.
We need roads and rails.
And airports.
We need roads.
Although that's been privatised. And rail.
Yeah. Go for the roads then.
Yeah.
Go for the roads.
We'll just go roads, yeah.
Go for the roads. Ports?
Well, I mean, of course you need...
Ports or not.
Not necessarily even government-run, though, because ports can be profitable. You could, as a private company, say, I own this port. Every import, you have to pay 10%, and then you have private...
That's happening already. That happens already.
So you can have ports...
Now, here's a funny one. I would disagree with that. I think the ports ought to be government-owned.
I agree. I
was hoping you were going to disagree with me, and you're not.
No, I 100% agree ports should be privately owned. Publicly owned. But it's just you could have them privately owned. But I think roads fundamentally need to be publicly owned because no private entity would develop a road.
So we agree on that.
Unless you were toll roads, and then you have a new tax. So I agree.
So we agree on that. So the question is, going back, is to what tax am I willing to pay? And the answer to that is I haven't thought about it.